Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Monday, August 15th, and here's some of what we're talking about tonight. Why would someone come after an FBI agent? The search of Mar-a-Lago is setting some folks off, and apparently these are not idle threats. A man attacked an FBI field office last week. So what are the feds watching out for, and what's being done about it? The Mar-a-Lago search warrant cited potential violations of the Espionage Act. We'll break down what the Espionage Act is and how investigators use it. Meanwhile, former President Trump faces another legal threat in Georgia. Two of his closest allies have been pulled into it. We'll explain. And it's been a year since U.S. forces pulled out of Afghanistan. The Taliban wasted no time taking over. So what's happened since the withdrawal? And how are the Afghan people doing now? Here's a little free legal advice, take it or leave it, but threatening a law enforcement officer is never a good idea, especially a federal agent. But those threats are on the rise after last week's search at Mar-a-Lago. A Pennsylvania man now faces charges for posting violent threats online against the FBI. Prosecutors accuse 46-year-old Adam Bies of threatening agents days after the search. According to the criminal complaint, Mr. Bies wrote this last Wednesday, quote, "Every single piece of blank who works for the FBI in any capacity, from the director down to the janitor, deserves to die," unquote. On Friday, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security issued a joint intelligence bulletin. It warns that threats against federal law enforcement are increasing. The warning cites an incident that happened the day that this bulletin came out. Officials say Ricky Schiffer fired a nail gun into the FBI field office in Cincinnati. He was later killed in a confrontation with police. When people get bold enough to openly threaten the FBI, how do we deal with that? Joining us now is NBC News national security analyst Frank Figliuzzi. He served 25 years at the FBI, including as its assistant director for counterintelligence. First of all, I wonder, Frank, what you make of the bulletin that was put out with regard to these increasing threats.
I'm saddened by the state of the threat level right now against federal agents, against FBI property and personnel, and what we're seeing play out in the most extreme and violent chat rooms and dark places on the internet and social media. It's the highest threat level against the FBI that I can recall from my 25-year career, and there's nothing even close to this. And what's sad really about this, Joshua, is it's all based on lies. It's all based on conspiracy theories, and they're deadly conspiracy theories. There's a Trump body count that we're keeping track of, and I write about this in a column that just came out today for MSNBC Daily. The body count rose last week with this man who died in the dirt in a cornfield near Wilmington, Ohio. Why? Because he bought into the deception, the lies being spewed by Trump and his minions about this search warrant. None of it true. Nobody seems to understand that due process was followed, that a federal magistrate signed this, that there were attempts to talk their way through this, negotiate between DOJ and the archives and Trump's lawyers, that a subpoena was issued and blown off, that it appears now through multiple media reports that someone tipped off DOJ that there was even more classified, and that's what prompted the search warrant, that Trump and the family watched all of this play out, not that there was planted evidence, but they watched it on a security camera remotely. So people are dying through deception, dying because they choose to buy into conspiracy theories. It's a dangerous time for everybody.
I also want to note that we've gotten some new information about what was and was not taken. The former president posted today on his social network called Truth Social that the FBI took some of his passports. During the search, he says that it took 3 passports, one of which was inspired, called it an assault on a political opponent. NBC White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell can report tonight that the Department of Justice tells us that those passports are not in the possession of the FBI. They've been returned. Sometimes during a search, something can get caught up, and apparently if that did happen, it has since been returned to Mr. Trump. But that apparently is not true if it ever was true. Those are now back in his possession. Frank, is this the kind of thing that you think was bound to happen? Let's be fair. The FBI is not the most popular federal agency, right? Very powerful, has a very mixed history, right? And I don't know if these are the kind of threats against FBI agents that agents have suffered in silence with for a long time, and we never thought about them until they got this bad, or if this is actually a brand new problem.
No, the depth and breadth of the threat level, Joshua, I can assure you, is unprecedented in the FBI, in its modern history at least. And look, if you want to talk about popularity of an agency, you don't sign up to be an FBI agent to be popular or to win a popularity contest. You take an oath to protect, preserve, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So there's no need to apologize to people who think they're not popular because their favorite politician or cult leader is under investigation. And that's what's going on here, is that there's an attempt by people who want power back, want control back in a certain political party, who feel they're being investigated, to lash out against the agency investigating them. So it's not a popularity contest. It's not what you sign up for.
What do you think should be done about this? I mean, the former president said in an interview with Fox News Digital today that he is willing to help kind of reduce the heated tone of all of this. Still maintains that he was an unfair target of this search, which he continues to refer to as a raid. But I wonder what you do about this. I mean, it's kind of hard to combat an idea once it has already spread. And it seems, as we've heard from our own Ben Collins, that a number of the people who are spreading this online don't even care if the feds are watching it. They're posting very openly. I mean, if you're going to post a threat and get caught, the easiest place to post it is on the public internet, and that's where this is showing up. What do we do about this?
So first, I think Merrick Garland is a smart chess player, and I think he did the right thing, although it's certainly not typical for an attorney general to release at his level a search warrant and a return of search to show what was seized. But he did that in kind of a checkmate against what Trump and others were saying falsely about the search. So he said, you know what, here it goes. We're going to play chess. I'll play back. We seized multiple classified documents at the top secret, even sensitive compartmented information level. Some of the most serious classified information the U.S. government has. Here you go. So first, that was a smart move. Secondly, we heard Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, come out today and completely rebuke the threats. We've got accountability happening. You led with the story of the man being arrested from Pennsylvania today. That's going to happen. And look, inevitably, there will be accountability here, and I think that's going to silence quite a few people. We saw today DOJ make a filing opposing the release of the affidavit in support of the search warrant. What did they say in that filing? It's way too sensitive to get this out in the public right now. And what did they say? It would even reveal 6E material. What does that mean? It means that a grand jury is involved in this search warrant. It means that there is a criminal investigation against Trump or others who were retaining and lying about this classified information. So accountability may be coming, and that's perhaps the greatest thing that can be done to stem the threat level.
I know we will get more into that affidavit in just a second. I skipped over, forgive me, a clip from Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois talking about the nature of these threats. Here's what the congressman said.
You know, on January 6th in the morning, I watched the president's speech while I was in the Capitol. And when it was done, I said, he just sicked thousands of people on us, meaning our democracy and the place where I was. So, you know, as we know that people died. Over 100 police officers were injured.
Briefly, Frank, we know that federal investigators are preparing for an increase in domestic violent extremism, some of it motivated by an array of different political motivations. How prepared do you think the FBI is to deal with the onslaught of whatever it's in for?
So DHS and the FBI have issued this joint intelligence warning, saying that the threat level is very high, that law enforcement writ large, federal law enforcement in particular, needs to hunker down, get ready, prepare an increased security posture. And Joshua, one of the concerns moving forward would be if indeed, for whatever charges, Trump is indicted and or arrested, we may be seeing just a glimpse now of the kind of threat level we'll be experiencing if people feel that somehow he's been unjustly indicted or arrested. So it's even more essential for the Department of Justice and the FBI to share whatever they can without violating the sensitivities of a pending investigation. But the more truth that gets out, the more we learn about the criminal procedure being followed here, the less likely people are to misunderstand what's happening. The problem is, you know, we're all in our own echo chambers. We get our news from one or two sources only. We seek affirmation from these people online that we only want to associate with. So it's very hard to penetrate with the truth. But this could be just simply a glimpse of what would happen if Trump is ultimately charged.
All right. Thank you, Frank. That's NBC News national security analyst Frank Figliuzzi starting us off tonight. And let's pick up with something that Frank alluded to. Now, the Mar-a-Lago search warrant and the list of what the agents found tell us a lot. The affidavit that justified the search would tell us much more. NBC News is among the outlets that have asked the court to release it. Today, as Frank mentioned, the Justice Department said it opposes that. It's asking the judge to keep the document sealed. The affidavit most likely lays out why the FBI searched the mansion, and the DOJ argues that releasing it could hamper its investigation. But even without the affidavit, the warrant clarified some things. It lists the federal statutes involved in the search, and among them, the Espionage Act. What might a law used to prosecute spies have to do with the documents at Mar-a-Lago? Let's continue now with NBC News legal analyst Cynthia Alksny. She is a former federal prosecutor. And Cynthia, if we could begin just with a quick layman's definition, what is the Espionage Act?
Well, the Espionage Act is pretty complicated, and it has several different sections. But it basically says it's a crime to possess, disseminate, dispose of, without authorization, documents related to national security that can be used to harm the United States.
We heard that depending on who you talk to, there was one gentleman on CBS who said that he believes this should be referred to as the Official Secrets Act as opposed to the Espionage Act because of the way that it's used nowadays. How much of it has to do with documents and secrets and sources and methods as opposed to more of the like James Bond stuff that we think of when we think of espionage?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. I'm asking basically about what the Espionage Act is used for, whether it's used for kind of acts of espionage, the way that we may think of it in that kind of James Bond pop culture way, as opposed to for more official secrets in terms of documents and the handling of them.
Right. Well, the sections that we're looking at really here have to do not with the James Bond secrets, but with the control of national security information that a person is not supposed to retain, and that the government has asked them to return it, and they are refusing to do so. That's basically it. And that can come in one of two ways. It can either be you got the documents legally because you were president, but then you kept them when you weren't supposed to, or you didn't get them legally and you also still refuse to return them. Those are the two sections of the Espionage Act that we're looking at. We're not really looking, no one, I think, at this point is suggesting that Trump is stealing documents and handing them over to the Russians. We're really just talking about he has these documents. The United States wants them back. There are documents. He's refusing to return them. And there is significant information about his willfulness and refusal to return them. For example, he's been asked to return them. There have been letters to return them. Lawyers have been to his place to return them. There's been a subpoena to return them. And ultimately, there had to be a search. And then there's a whole collection of evidence about his consciousness of guilt, knowing he's supposed to return them. But the way he's given all these conflicting explanations, like I don't really have them, or the FBI planted them, or I declassified them, which is impossible. He couldn't have declassified them. I mean, all of those conflicting, he went that away kind of explanations show willfulness and a refusal to return them.
Let me ask about a few of the maybe finer points of this law. I want to key in on something you're saying just very briefly. It sounds like you're saying that the use of the Espionage Act does not so much have to do with having documents that are accidentally in one's possession or that can be explained away. There's a little bit more intent behind the way that this is prosecuted as opposed to, oh yeah, I should have returned those, let me just give them back. This is different from that, right?
Yes, this has a higher standard. It has a willfulness standard that the government has to prove. But because of the conflicting explanations that Trump has given in the last couple of days, and because of all of the opportunities, they were actually pretty deferential to him. All the opportunities that he got to return these documents, they should not have a difficulty meeting the willfulness standard. The other interesting thing about this is it's not the ordinary course statute that you would choose to prosecute somebody with a violation like this. And to me, it indicates a real level of seriousness with this warrant, not only the Espionage Act, but the obstruction. If all they wanted was the documents back, and some people are saying, oh, they just want the documents back, they would have used a different statute. The fact that the Department of Justice is using this statute, which is a very serious statute, it's a 10-year prison term, up to 10-year prison term per document, and the obstruction statute, which is up to a 20-year prison term, indicates they're very serious about it. And that is, of course, supported by what happened at the Department of Justice today when they refused to open up the affidavit, as they should have. But they do talk about the ongoing investigation. So you know this isn't really just about the documents. This is a big grand jury investigation that is continuing.
I know I got to let you go in a second, but let me play a quick clip from NBC Justice correspondent Ken Delanian, who spoke to John Bolton, who is former national security advisor, about the possession of these documents and this investigation. Here is part of what he had to say. Watch.
I don't think the president particularly cared what the rules were. He had a very distorted view of what the president's constitutional authority was. I'm a very strong believer in the unitary executive and a powerful president, but it doesn't mean that that what's permissible to do is prudent to do. And I think there was no filter between those two things in his brain.
Before I have to let you go, let's suppose that Ambassador Bolton is correct and the president maybe just didn't care what he was doing with the documents. Where is the line in terms of the prosecution if, for example, he didn't share them with anyone, if they were just sitting at Mar-a-Lago? I'm not trying to make excuses for the former president, but I'm just trying to understand the way that the law views the possession of these documents based on what might happen to them other than just being at Mar-a-Lago. Briefly, before we go, does that make any difference?
It does make a difference. If it were a mistake that he had the documents, and when the Department of Justice said, please give us these documents back, he gave them back, then this statute would not apply, because one of the tests is whether or not your refusal to return the documents. But what we have in this case is not only does the president have the documents for whichever way he got them, he has the documents. He's been asked repeatedly to return them. Lawyers have been down to his office and asked for it. It was subpoenaed, and we've ultimately had to get the documents with a warrant. If we have all the documents, it's not clear to me we still have all the documents. But the refusal to return them is the difference between just a mistake, oh, I'm sorry, I'll give them back to you, and an Espionage Act violation.
Former federal prosecutor Cynthia Alksney, appreciate you making time for us. Thank you very much. And before we move on from this story, we should note we have been in touch with the White House in terms of the way that it has been dealing with these threats against federal agents. We asked if the president has been kept apprised of that, and the White House official told NBC News that he is being kept apprised of the threats to law enforcement. Didn't elaborate much beyond that, but the president is being kept aware of these various threats against law enforcement. Still to come, we'll shift gears for another primary preview. Two of the former president's Republican critics are up for re-election. How will Congresswoman Liz Cheney and Senator Lisa Murkowski do tomorrow? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Former President Trump is not on a primary ballot tomorrow, but his presence will be felt with candidates he's endorsing and others who've become his critics. Wyoming Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney is running for her 4th term in the U.S. House. She's co-chair of the Special House Committee, vice chair. She is vice chair of the Special House Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Cheney will face off against Trump-endorsed candidate Harriet Hageman. A recent University of Wyoming poll shows only 28% of Republican primary voters say they support the Congresswoman's re-election. 57% say they support Hageman. Over the next 2 days, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is fundraising in Jackson, Wyoming. And that is where we find NBC senior national politics reporter John Allen standing by. John, let me ask you about Congresswoman Cheney's re-election bid. Here's a part of her closing message, one of her late campaign ads. Watch.
This is Donald Trump's legacy, but it cannot be the future of our nation. History has shown us over and over again how these types of poisonous lies destroy free nations.
John, talk about the former president's presence in this race and how the Congresswoman is trying to counteract it for another term.
This race has been completely run, JJ, on the axis of Donald Trump and Liz Cheney fighting over national politics, over the future of the Republican Party and the future of the Republic itself. She has not looked to run a local race here, as you saw from the ad. She's running on these themes that you hear her talking about in Washington, about January 6th, about the danger that she sees in Donald Trump and Trumpism. And of course, we're looking forward to see what her next move is, because most folks here think she has not run a race with the intention of winning. In fact, I spoke to a Republican county commission candidate today who said nobody would piss off without voting for something else.
Let me ask you about the opponent, Harriet Hageman. Here she is in May alongside the former president. Watch.
We're fed up with the January 6th Commission and those people who think that they can gaslight us. And we're fed up with Liz Cheney. We are putting everyone on notice. As of November 8th, we're taking our country back.
John, tell us more about Harriet Hageman. What should we know about her?
You should know that she used to be a Liz Cheney supporter, and that she has gone, whole hog for Trump, and that's basically what happened here. There were a number of candidates who thought they might be able to get a Trump endorsement. Harriet Hageman was the one who did, and she has attached herself completely to him. And if you were going to do that anywhere in the country, this is the place to do it. Donald Trump won Wyoming by a 43-point margin in the 2020 the 2020 presidential election. This is the biggest margin that he had across the country. And, there are some crossover Democrats here in Wyoming, but I was looking at registration numbers today. Just aren't very many of them. This is a supermajority Republican state. And that's why Hageman attaching herself to Trump has been such a boon for her.
Liz Cheney is a conservative Republican. She's a Cheney, for God's sakes. There's nothing about her that is not in the mainstream of conventional Republican politics. And yet, to hear Kevin McCarthy speak on Fox News about why he's there and his view of this, it's clear there's a split. Here's part of what he said.
And the principal philosophy is less government, an idea of freedom in the aspect, just the concepts of a country that's conceived in liberty and dedicated the proposition that we're all.
But hasn't she fit that bill over the last several years?
I think her whole focus has been different. Her whole focus has been against one individual, whether she has information or not, instead of focusing on her district itself.
John, I think it's sometimes easy to kind of fall into rabbit holes about what's important in Washington, but Congresswoman Cheney is the vice chair of the January 6th committee. They've got a ton of work they're trying to get done this year. Guarantee there's going to be more to be done next year. And so there's got to be some conversations about what it would mean if she lost and if the party began to shift away from the accountability that she's looking for.
Well, there would only be more to be done next year if Democrats hold the House of Representatives. And if they don't, Kevin McCarthy, the guy you just saw on Fox News, is going to be the one who determines whether there continues to be a January 6th commission. And the reason that I say that is that you've sort of got an option if you're McCarthy, which is to shut it down completely or to turn it into something completely different that chases down all of the fever pitch conspiracy theories that have been circulating around Trump world about January 6th for the last year and a half.
What other issues are at play here? Is the race in Wyoming all about January 6th and President Trump? Are there other issues that people are talking about, or is this really kind of a mini referendum on the Republican Party?
There are no issues here other than Donald Trump versus Liz Cheney. And of course, as you know, there were 10 Republicans who voted for impeachment. 4 of them chose not to run for re-election. 3 of them have lost. 2 of them won their primaries, or at least have advanced the general election. And Liz Cheney, she's the last stop on Donald Trump's revenge tour for impeachment. And that's what this race has been completely about.
Has anyone been coming to her aid in Wyoming? Clearly not the Republican Party, with some members like Kevin McCarthy, but who are the allies of Liz Cheney? Is she kind of running by herself right now, or is anybody supporting her, endorsing her?
Well, what you see is a lot of the old school establishment, moderate Republican Party in Washington has sent checks and folks like that around the country, people who supported her father, people who support that brand of what you and I would consider conservative, traditional Republican politics. She's been labeled a liberal by some in the Republican Party. I don't think by anybody's standards her voting records in Congress suggests that. In fact, she was with Trump 95% of the time or so when he was president. But her support base is those establishment Republicans that are disgusted by Trump. And in addition, some Democrats who believe that what she's done is brave and courageous. Arguably, she's given up more than anybody else in Congress to make this stand, because she was the number 3 Republican in the House on January 6th. And she was booted from that job, which had her on a path to potentially become Speaker of the House of Representatives. So she's paid a price to be in this position, and it'll be interesting to see whether she's able to rebound and turn this into a larger national platform for a debate about who we are as Americans and who the Republican Party is.
And briefly, John, before I got to let you go, Dick Cheney, former vice president, former defense secretary, released an ad in Liz Cheney's support not too long ago. How did that resonate with voters, if at all?
Not at all. It's not surprising to anybody here that Dick Cheney supports his daughter. I think because she is seen as so close to him, I don't think anybody believed that what she was doing in Washington subsequent to January 6th was at odds with what his views were. So I don't think it was a big surprise here on any level that he thought that. Certainly the rhetoric that he used, calling Donald Trump a coward, was very sharp. And anybody who's familiar with Dick Cheney's politics knows that he doesn't do anything soft.
Indeed. All right. Thank you, John. That's NBC's John Allen joining us tonight from Jackson, Wyoming. Meanwhile, Alaska will also hold primaries tomorrow. However, it's getting ready for its first ranked choice election. Former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin is running in a special election for Alaska's only House seat. She faces fellow Republican Nick Begich and Democrat Mary Peltola. They're running to succeed the late Congressman Don Young. He died in March. Also, incumbent Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski faces a slate of GOP challengers. You may remember she lost her 2010 primary but won that general election as a write-in candidate. So how does ranked choice voting work? NBC congressional reporter Ali Vitale explains from Anchorage, Alaska.
Voters on the last frontier charting a new one when it comes to the way they vote.
I think it's an interesting concept. I'm really excited to see how it plays out.
Using a system known as ranked choice voting for the first time this week in marquee primary contests for U.S. Senate and the lone statewide House seat left open when longtime Congressman Don Young passed away in March.
Most people, once you see it, can rank 4 things, right? Anything from ice cream to, I don't know, I have my kids rank their favorite breakfast foods.
And now they'll be ranking candidates.
Exactly.
It's new in Alaska, but becoming more commonplace across the country in the last 2 decades, from Utah to Washington State, in New York City's mayoral race and Maine's gubernatorial. Here in Alaska, where the 2018 ballots looked like this and voters could only pick one candidate, now they vote in order of numbered preference, up to 4. All candidates from all parties listed together.
The rules can vary, but here, if you get 50% of the vote outright, you win. If no one gets there, the candidate with the fewest votes gets eliminated. Their voters' votes are then divvied up based on second choice and on until someone gets 50% and wins.
That may take some time, which isn't exactly new in a state this big, twice the size of Texas.
I don't think we'll know anything for certain for at least a week or two, and we won't have certified results until the end of the month.
Alaskans voted for these new rules in 2020, but that doesn't mean all the candidates are on board.
In Alaska, we have this bizarre system that's been newfangled, that's been newly adopted.
You have that ranked choice crap voting. If you're in 5th place, you get points. If you're in 3rd place, you get points.
But ranked choice voting advocates say this system encourages candidates to appeal to a broader audience.
It rewards candidates that look for connection. And you don't have to be positionally centrist. You need to be someone who is sort of civil in your behavior. And
Sarah Palin is famous, but come on.
That means this election should be a little less negative, in theory.
As governor, Palin drove oil investment out of Alaska, quit, and left Alaska to be a celebrity who didn't want to be stuck in Wasilla.
But negative ads and attacks tempered with some goodwill towards rivals, even for the most partisan of firebrands.
I'm very, very thankful that we have great candidates up here. You guys have good choices. Kind of can't go wrong.
That was NBC's Ali Vitale reporting from Anchorage, Alaska. We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including a new president in Kenya after another troubled election, and 2 of the former U.S. president's allies caught up in concerns over election interference in Georgia. Tonight's headlines begin with Rudy Giuliani and a criminal investigation into the 2020 election in Georgia. His lawyers say that he is now a target of that probe into former President Trump's alleged interference. Mr. Giuliani was initially told he was a material witness. The investigation is looking into, quote, coordinated attempts to unlawfully alter the outcome of the 2020 elections, unquote. The subpoena accuses Mr. Giuliani of making false statements at legislative hearings in Georgia. He falsely claimed that there was widespread voter fraud. There's been no reliable proof of that. Rudy Giuliani was ordered to testify in front of a grand jury, and his lawyer says he intends to show up this Wednesday. Now, to be clear, even though Mr. Giuliani is described as a target by his lawyers, that does not necessarily mean that he will be indicted. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is now caught up in that investigation, too. Today, a federal judge ruled that the senator must testify before a state grand jury. That testimony is part of an investigation into whether Donald Trump broke any laws while trying to overturn his election loss in Georgia. Lindsey Graham had argued he was immune to testifying because he is a sitting U.S. senator. According to the subpoena, he called Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, in the weeks after the election. Secretary Raffensperger suggested at the time that Graham questioned him about tossing out legitimate mail-in ballots. Senator Graham denies this, and his office says he will appeal the judge's decision. Today in Ukraine, Europe's largest nuclear power plant dealt with more attacks nearby. Russia and Ukraine are each blaming each other for the attacks near the plant. Now officials in the city of Zaporizhia are preparing evacuation plans in case of a radiation leak. NBC's Josh Letterman has more from Kyiv.
There are fresh reports of shelling tonight in Zaporizhia near the nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear plant in Europe, with the mayor of the town where that plant is located saying he's been hearing explosions, urging people to take cover, and telling AFP that the situation is getting riskier and riskier by the day as the United Nations is now desperately seeking access to that site, asking both Ukrainian and Russian authorities to grant the UN access to the site. But so far they have not been able to secure that access through the Russian authorities who now occupy that plant. But the UN Secretary General did have a phone conversation today with Russia's defense minister about efforts to restore some semblance of safety to that site, as people not only in Ukraine but throughout Europe are worried about the possibility of radiation spread. There are also worrying new signs about the worsening relationship between Russia and the West, as Russia's defense ministry said today it forced a British spy plane out of Russian airspace after it says that plane violated Russia's air border near the White Sea. We also saw a Russian-backed court in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine charge 5 foreigners with being mercenaries, including several British citizens, a Croatian citizen, and a Swedish citizen. 3 of those 5 were given the possibility of the death penalty.
That was NBC's Josh Lederman reporting from Kyiv. Kenya has a new president. Its Electoral Commission chairman has declared William Ruto the winner of a close race, but not without some controversy. Minutes before this was announced, 4 of Kenya's 7 election commissioners held another news conference where they disavowed the results. The division sparked more confusion in a nation that has been waiting nearly a week for a winner. Kenya also has a history of deadly post-election violence. It's unclear whether William Ruto's challenger, the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, will contest the results in court. A spokesman for Mr. Odinga says he plans to address Kenyans tomorrow. Up next, Afghanistan, 1 year later. What has it been like there since the U.S. pulled out and the Taliban cracked down? We'll meet a photographer who documented this last year and learn more about an ongoing medical crisis in Kabul when we come back. Today marks 1 year since the Taliban captured Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. The takeover prompted U.S. service members, NATO allies, and vulnerable Afghans to evacuate as best they could. More than 124,000 civilians were relocated. It was the largest non-combatant evacuation in American history. When the Taliban took over, much of the world stopped sending exports to Afghanistan. One of the most pressing issues right now is a medical crisis, including one at a children's hospital in Kabul. From our partners at Sky News, Stuart Ramsey has the story.
This is a medical emergency, and every day it's getting worse here. Critically ill children are squeezed into cots 2 or 3 at a time. There's just not enough room, and there are too many patients in desperate need, and every day more are coming. This is the top children's hospital in Afghanistan. It's the best there is, but they're running out of everything: medicine, supplies, equipment, everything. Medical staff know they just can't treat their patients, but they keep trying anyway.
They've all very poorly, these little ones.
Serious. This one CP. This one is CP. This one is CP. 3 of them is CP. Cerebral palsy.
Cerebral palsy.
Aspiration.
And it's difficult, but are their chances of survival quite low?
CP treatments, no treatment, CP.
So there's no treatment?
For Afghanistan.
There's over 500 patients in the Indira Gandhi Hospital. They've only room for 300. Ward after ward is exactly the same, jam-packed with really poorly babies and children. The head doctor says they're overwhelmed by demand and lack of equipment. Foreign aid lost after the Taliban takeover is critical, he says, if they are to save lives.
There's a need for some good drugs.
Yes.
You don't purchase from outside the hospital. And this is a big problem. Our peoples, like this, are very poor. We have need some, like we need for ventilator machine. We don't have ventilator.
Aziz struggles to pick up his daughter Moslema and place her next to her brother. They've come from 2 provinces to get here. They've genetic kidney disease, like 2 of their siblings already dead.
The chance of survival is too low. I mean, 80% chance of dying.
And that's because there's nothing you can do?
We cannot, no, because we don't have any facility for these patients here.
Many have serious illnesses that could be successfully treated. It's not a lack of skill here, it's a lack of resources. 12-year-old Amina has meningitis. they're struggling to save her.
Healthcare in Afghanistan, particularly in the provinces, has been poor for decades. That isn't the issue here. The point is, we're in the best children's hospital in the whole of the country, and they're overwhelmed. They just don't have the resources, they don't have the money, they don't have medicines, and many of the children who come here are simply going to die, not because they couldn't be treated, but because there is no way of treating them. They need international community help.
The Taliban are in charge here. Indeed, an armed guard was assigned to us the whole time. It's one of the problems for the international community. Despite the Taliban's intransigent position on many issues, the hospital's president, himself a surgeon, is asking for help with this medical crisis.
The baby's not ill, it just has no food.
As we walked the corridors, a woman grabbed us. She wanted help to buy baby formula.
Can you not get formula anywhere? So really, this little one, there's nothing actually wrong. She's starving hungry, and there's no formula, and that we're hearing all. I mean, even the hospital doesn't have formula. So really, she's not ill enough to be admitted, but just is starving hungry.
Malnutrition across Afghanistan is out of control. The worst affected come here if they can make it. Safia is 7. She's just arrived. But for the first time in weeks, the family has some hope.
Are you hopeful that she will get better?
For many others, though, there is nothing but despair. Malnutrition has engulfed 2-year-old Shireen Khan's body. He's fighting for his life. His mum can do nothing. This is a nationwide medical emergency. Golbasha doesn't care who's to blame. She just wants her son to live. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Kabul.
Life in Afghanistan has changed dramatically over the past year, especially for women. An up-close look at the challenges they now face from a photographer who's been there. Before we go. Today, Afghanistan remains under Taliban rule. Many aspects of life have changed. A photojournalist traveled to Afghanistan to document just how. Check out this photo. It shows a Taliban fighter guarding a former American base in Ghazni City. The Department of Defense says it left more than $7 billion of military equipment behind, including vehicles, aircraft, and weapons. Life has also changed dramatically for women. The Taliban require them to wear full-length burqas in public. This billboard in Kandahar City explains the new dress code. For most girls, it's been over a year since they went to school. The Taliban banned them from continuing their educations past the 6th grade. Joining us here in Studio 6E is photojournalist Victor Blue. His photos appear in his New York Times guest essay called Afghanistan, 1 year after the fall. Mr. Blue, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me in.
You wrote in your essay that you first went to Afghanistan in 2009. What did you see then in terms of the status and the plight of women in Afghanistan, and what do you see now, a year after the U.S. withdrew?
Well, in 2009, you know, the U.S. was involved in their ramping up their counterinsurgency campaign. So they were spreading out into the countryside, kind of atomizing their forces and kind of imposing their occupation for broader in the countryside. And in the cities, in urban areas of Afghanistan, there were real gains for Afghan women. You know, there were requirements that they served in political offices. There were universities were open to them in new ways, and there was a massive effort to expand education to Afghan women. The real challenge has been the difference from 2009 over the whole course of the more than a decade that I've been working there. Certainly now, under Taliban rule, we're a year into Taliban rule today, the changes have been profound for Afghan women. Their lives are severely restricted in ways that they weren't a year ago.
You wrote that Afghan women have been the most victimized by the Taliban. Give us an example of what that victimization looks like.
Well, the requirements that they cover their faces in public now, the requirements that they travel with a male relative, a mahram, the requirements that they And of course, the fundamental biggest one, of course, is the inability for Afghan high school girls to attend school. And it's more profound than just, you know, that girls can't go. So girls have been able to go to school up until the 6th grade, and they're attending universities now. But leaving out these key years is going to create a dearth for future university students and future female professionals in Afghanistan. So it's a pretty far-reaching problem.
How do men in Afghanistan react to this? You wrote that you met a man that you met who was angry about his sister and daughter losing their rights.
Well, that man was a Taliban fighter named Usman that I spent time with, a Taliban commander who, you know, when I asked him about his view on Afghan women being educated, he expressed his frustration with his leadership. He believed that, you know, one of the things he fought for was for a better future Afghanistan, and that, you know, that part of that was the ability for his daughters and his sisters to be able to fulfill their dreams of an education and eventually to work.
I just want to be clear. This is a man who was fighting with the Taliban.
Oh, yeah. This is a former suicide bomber who was unable to complete his mission during the years of the war.
And he's mad now that the Taliban have not done for women what he thought they were going to do.
Right. He's frustrated that, you know, it's hard to kind of understand, but there's, you know, there is a diversity of opinion within the movement. Like, we tend to view the Taliban from the outside as kind of a monolithic movement, and it is in many ways. It's authoritarian, it's fundamentalist. That said, you know, I'm less concerned generally with the machinations of the leadership, and I try to spend a lot of time with the kind of rank-and-file fighters, and there's a real diversity of opinion among them. And one of the things we kind of connected over was his hope for the future, the future of his daughters and his sisters.
The UN says that half of Afghanistan is experiencing crushing levels of food insecurity. How are people getting by, just feeding themselves day to day?
Well, it's tough. You know, Afghanistan has an unbelievable capacity to weather difficulty and struggle. You know, they've done it for 4 decades of constant war until now. You know, this is the first year of peace in decades. People are doing what they have to do. You know, former professionals are selling vegetables in vegetable carts. You know, in Kandahar City, I saw women selling vegetables from carts in the streets, which is a real rarity in Afghanistan, one that is generally frowned upon because of the conservative nature of the culture. But the Taliban authorities in Kandahar, I think, have recognized how bad the situation is and how they're not going to crack down on people who are just trying to make enough money to eat. And so allowing women in full burqas to sell in the streets the way that men do.
Was there any sense of triumph among any of the Taliban fighters that you saw? I mean, there are U.S. and coalition soldiers who've come back with this joke that the Taliban used to tell. You may have all the watches, but we have all the time. And I think they figure that if they just waited it out, they will wait out every other empire that comes to invade. Is there any sense of triumph in Afghanistan now?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The Talibans are extremely proud of their victory. You know, they won a 20-year war against the world's biggest superpower. And the thing I think we tend to forget is how much the Talibans also have suffered. You know, they lost tens of thousands of fighters, and those are brothers. Most of the Taliban fighters I met after the fall were the younger brothers of fighters who'd been killed in the fighting, because that's kind of the process, is you replace your older brother once he's been killed. So they are very excited for the victory, very proud, but they're also very, very happy that the country's finally at peace.
A few more things I got to ask you before I let you go. Our partners at Sky News spoke to a senior leader at the Taliban, who was trying to get the world to stop embargoing Afghanistan because of its ban on girls being educated past the 6th grade. Are they worried at all about how long they can sustain this without outside help?
Absolutely. I mean, the Talibans are very, very worried. It's a strange dynamic. They're not very susceptible to outside pressure, but they're very concerned with their standing in the international community. They want to be engaged. They want to engage, and they want to be engaged. The problem is that there's...
And they want to be seen as the legitimate government.
They want to be seen as the legitimate government. Yeah. I mean, they fought for 20 years. They think that they see that the country as theirs at this point. The sad thing is that they're making the same mistakes that the Western-backed government made. They're not making a place for the diverse, both ethnic and other types of groups in Afghanistan that have a stake in the future of the country. And of course, by insisting on banning high school girls from studying, they're isolating themselves on the world stage.
Last thing I have to ask you before I let you go, as a photojournalist, the thing that everyone wants to know about people who do what you do, how do you bear it? How do you bear to go to Afghanistan and look at some of what we saw in your pictures in Stuart Ramsey's story? How do you bear it?
Well, you know, for me, I really enjoy being a witness. I love history, and I love being a part of creating history. And, you know, I was there for the fall of Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan on August 15th. I stood outside the U.S. Embassy and watched the Chinooks evacuate, and I photographed some of the first Taliban fighters to enter Kabul. For me, that was like a culmination of over a decade of trying to bear witness to this really difficult country. And I feel like, as an American, I owe something to Afghan people. I owe the Afghan story my witness. I gotta stick it out.
Photojournalist Victor Blue, I appreciate you bearing witness to the horrors that have happened over there, but I think we're better for being able to see it than not being able to see it. Thank you for your pictures, and thank you for making time for us tonight. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Great. Thank you so much.
Hey, remember, we love to hear from you about anything we discussed tonight. We are at NBC Now Tonight on social media. Leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. So until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you for making time for us, and we'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.